Hey, welcome back everyone. My name is Sushant Satish and I am your instructor for this Azure Administrator Associate Examination AZ-104 training. We are starting a new module today. This module, we're going to learn about Azure Administration. And in the first lesson, we're going to talk about Resource Manager. Let's have a quick look at what are the things we are going to learn on this particular lesson. We're going to start with what is Resource Manager, and we are going to understand few terminologies around Resource Manager as well. And what are the different ways you can deploy these resource groups? What is Resource Manager lock, and how can you move these resources between these resource groups or subscriptions? How can you remove resources and resource groups? And what are some of the limitations of these resources? And along the way, whenever I explain things, if it is necessary, I will take you back to the portal to show you exactly what I mean. So without wasting any more time, let's get into it. The infrastructure for your application is typically made up of many components. Maybe a virtual machine, a storage account, and a virtual network. Or a web app, database, and database server, and a third-party services. These components are not separate entities. Instead, they are related and interdependent part of a single entity. You want to deploy, manage, and monitor them as a group. Azure Resource Manager enables you to work with these resources in your solution as a group. You can deploy, update, or delete all the resources for your solution in a single coordinated operation. You use a template for deployment, and that template can work for different environments such as testing, staging, and production as well. So Resource Manager provides security, auditing, and tagging features to help you manage your resources after deployment. Let's look at the management layer experience of Resource Manager. So Resource Manager provides a consistent management layer to perform tasks through Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, Azure Portal, REST APIs, and Client SDKs. All capabilities that are available in Azure Portal are also available through Azure PowerShell, Azure CLI, and Azure REST APIs and Client SDKs. Functionality initially released through APIs will be represented in the portal within 180 days of initial release. You can choose the tools and APIs that works best for you, and they have the same capability and provide consistent results. This following image shows how all the tools interact with the same Resource Manager API, and the API passes the request to the Resource Manager service, which authenticates and authorizes the request. Resource Manager then routes the request to the appropriate resource providers. And you may be wondering, what are the benefits of Resource Manager? There are several benefits. Let me quickly highlight some of it before we move on to terminology. You can deploy, manage, and monitor all the resources for your solution as a group rather than handling these resources individually. Another benefit would be you would be able to repeatedly deploy your solution throughout the development lifecycle and have confidence in your resources are deployed in a consistent state. Or you can manage your infrastructure through declarative templates rather than scripts. Another benefit would be you can define the dependencies between resources so they are deployed in the correct order. All right, so let's look at some of the terminologies. If you're new to Azure Resource Manager, there are some terms you might not be familiar with. Something like resource. So what is a resource? Resource is a manageable item that is available through Azure. Some common resources are a virtual machine, storage account, web app, database, and virtual machine, but there are many more. So what is a resource group? A resource group is a container that holds related resources for an Azure solution. The resource group can include all the resources for the solution or only those resources that you want to manage as a group. You decide how you want to allocate resources to resource group based on what makes the most sense for your organization. Right. So let's understand what is resource provider. Resource provider is a service that supplies the resources you can deploy and manage through Resource Manager. Each resource provider offers operations for working with the resources that are deployed. Some common resource providers are Microsoft.Compute, which supplies the virtual machine resource. Another resource provider is Microsoft.Storage, which supplies the storage account resource, and Microsoft.Web, which supplies the resources related to web apps. So what are ARM template? ARM template is a JSON or JavaScript object notation file that defines one or more resources to deploy to a resource group. It also defines the dependencies between the deployed resources. The template can be used to deploy the resources consistently and repeatedly. Finally, let's understand what is a declarative syntax. Syntax that lets you state, here is what I intended to create without having to write the sequence of programming commands to create it. The Resource Manager template is an example of declarative syntax. In the file, you define the properties for the infrastructure to deploy to Azure. Let's understand resource group deployments. Resources can be deployed to any new or existing resource group. Deployment of resources to a resource group becomes a job where you can track the template execution. If deployment fails, the output of the job can describe why the deployment failed, whether the deployment is a single resource to a group or the template to a group. You can use the information to fix any errors and redeploy. Deployments are incremental. If a resource group consists of 2 web apps and you decide to deploy a third, the existing web app will not be removed. Currently, immutable deployments are not supported in a resource group. To implement an immutable deployment, you must create a new resource group. So you need to be aware of some of the considerations. Resource groups are at the simplest a logical connection of resources. There are a couple of small rules for resource groups. Resources can only exist in one resource group, and these resource groups cannot be renamed. And you need to understand that resource groups can have resources of many different types and services in one single group. And resource group can have resources from many different regions as well. So there are some important factors to consider when defining your resource group. All the resources in your group should have a same life cycle. You deploy, update, and delete them together. Each resource can only exist in a single resource group. I'm sure you're aware of that. So please note that by scoping permissions to the resource group, you can add, remove, and modify resources easily without having to recreate assignments and scopes. So let's understand what is Resource Manager logs. A common concern with resources provisioned in Azure is the ease in which they can be deleted. Let me show you what I mean. I'm on my Azure portal. I'm going to quickly go to a resource group. I'm going to select a resource group. Looks like I don't have any resources within this group. Let's pick another resource group. As you can see that there is a resource within this resource group. So I, as a user, if I have contributor or owner access to this resource group or in the subscription, I can simply go and select the resource. I would be able to go and delete the resource without any issues. So the Resource Manager logs allow organization to put a structure in place that prevents the accidental deletion of resources in Azure. So I have this resource group over here. I have many resources within part of this resource group. I want to prevent any sort of accidental deletion happening in this resource group. So on the left hand side under settings, I can find there is an option called logs. So you can associate the logs with a subscription, resource group, or resource. And logs are inherited by child resources. So I can simply add, and I can add a log. When trying to add a log, there are two types of logs available: read-only and delete logs. Read-only logs prevent any changes to the resources, and delete logs will prevent any sort of deletion. Please note that only the owner and user access administrator roles can create or delete management logs. So let's understand how you can move resources between resource group and subscription. Sometimes you may need to move resources to either a new subscription or a new resource group in the same subscription. When moving resources, both the source group and the target group are locked during the operation. Write and delete operations are blocked on the resource group until the move completes. This lock means you can't add, update, or delete resources in the resource groups. But it doesn't mean that the resources are frozen. For example, if you move a virtual machine to a new resource group, an application accessing the virtual machine experiences no downtime. So there are some limitations. So before beginning the process, be sure to read Move Operation Support for Resources page. This page details what resource can be moved between resource groups and subscriptions. So I'm on my Azure portal. When you click on a resource group, select the resources which you would like to move. So right now you can see that the move operation is grayed out. As soon as you select resources, this turns on. So you can click on this move option. Let me zoom it. And you get two options: move to another resource and move to a subscription. So when I click on move to another resource, it asks you to select a resource group where you would like to move. And you select a new resource group and you say that you understand the tools and scripts associated with the resource, and you can hit OK to move it. Another option is I can go back and click on move and select another subscription. So I don't have any subscription to move the resources to. So there is a prerequisite for it. So you need to add another subscription to your existing Azure account so that it gets an option to show you where to move these resources to. And if you're wondering how to remove resources, you can select these and you can delete these resources. Or you can select the delete the resource group as well. Before deleting it, you need to give a consent to say that at least you need to type in the name of the resource group. Or sometimes if you are trying to delete a particular resource, you just need to type yes to confirm it. You can use the PowerShell to delete the resource group as well. Use caution when deleting a resource group. Deleting a resource group deletes all the resources contained within it. That resource group might contain resources that resources in other resource group depends on. If you're using PowerShell to remove the resource group, use the command remove-Azure resource group. You need to understand some of the resource limits as well. Azure provides the ability to observe the number of each network resource type that you have deployed in your subscription and what your subscription limits are. The ability to view resource usage against limits is helpful to track current usage and plan for future use. So the limits shown are the limits for your subscription. If you need to increase a default limit, there is a request increase link. You will complete and submit the support request. All resources have a maximum limit listed in Azure List. If your current limit is already at the maximum number, the limit can be increased. Alright, so now that we have learned about the resource manager and the resource group and the resource group limitations, in the next lesson, we're going to learn about Azure Portal and Cloud Shell. I will see you in the next video. Till then, take care.